Hi everyone, this is the second lecture of week 6. And again, you can listen to this as an audio if you want. And it is best if you read Genesis 32 and Genesis 33 before you listen to this lecture. So when we left off, Jacob was finally able to leave Laban's house with everyone intact. Rachel's death has not yet happened yet, though we did discuss it in the preceding lecture. So he's finally able to leave, but before he is able to make it back to the promised land, he has another problem that he needs to get over. Okay. By Genesis 32, we find out that in order to get back to Canaan, Jacob and his family have to go through territory belonging to Esau. That is the territory of Edom, something which Jacob, understandably, is not very keen to do. And to prepare for this, Jacob sends a rather series of groveling messages to Esau, to which Esau responds by telling him that he is indeed coming to meet his little brother, and with 400 men with him. So it sounds a lot like the start of a battle instead of a family reunion. Okay, so things at this point are not looking up for Jacob. Okay, and a different life situation as to Jacob's distress. So we know that when Jacob originally fled his family's father's house, he had very little to lose. Now, of course, as a patriarch with a very large family, lots of stuff, 4 wives, right? Multiple children. He has, of course, much more to lose and therefore probably much more to think about. And this may explain Jacob's prayer to God in Genesis 32, verses 9 through 12, reminding God of the Abrahamic promise and pleading with God for protection against his brothers. It's odd that God seems to kind of come in at points to protect Jacob, but Jacob is not, he's a very wily trickster kind of fellow, and he is not always seen as turning to God. So, it's a very interesting characterization of this character. Jacob also, to get ready for his encounter with Esau, takes some tactical measures to ensure that if his brother attacks, that not all of his family will be killed off. We are told that Jacob sends Esau kind of 3 waves of lots of presents in the hopes that Esau will be appeased. Jacob also decides to move the rest of his family, the children, the servants, and all of them, to put them on one side of the river while he sleeps on the other side. And the idea seems to be that if Esau attacks during the night, he would just kill Jacob and allow time for the rest of his family on the other side of the river time to get away. Perhaps Jacob's even thinking that if Esau kills him, then that's enough to appease Esau, and so the rest of his family will survive. Jacob, is spending all this time by himself on one side of the river Jabbok, all by himself. It really sets up the scene for what follows. Okay, and this is Genesis 32, verses 24 and following. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob said to him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip socket at the thigh muscle. In a well-known incident, Jacob, before being reunited with his brother Esau, whom he has wronged, has a mysterious pre-dawn night wrestling match, during which Jacob is touched on the hip, dislocating it, and is also, like Sarah and Abraham, given a new name, Israel. So there's lots of interesting aspects of the story. Notice, firstly, that Jacob's wrestling partner, there's hints that the wrestling partner is either divine or quasi-divine. Maybe God, which is how it's usually interpreted, maybe an angel. Now the two, God and angel, or his angelic representative, they slide in and out of the biblical text, so it's not clear. Notice how this creature that wrestles with Jacob also appears at night, but is very, very eager to leave when the sun rises. There's hints that he's kind of a night angel, a dark angel, who cannot really be in sunlight. And there are points in the biblical text where God is presented almost as this kind of deadly night angel, an angel of death. Okay, but whatever this angel is, cannot seem, this angel doesn't seem to be able to handle sunlight, and therefore is eager to leave in that liminal period between night and sunrise, when the spaces between the realms are thin. Okay. The wrestling partner, whoever he is, also seems to have the magical abilities to dislocate things. Okay. And notice also that Jacob's wrestling partner is very, very reluctant to give Jacob his name. So this is very much like a Rumpelstiltskin kind of narrative. If the name defines something essential about you, knowing your name means that you have power over them, or knowing someone's name or a being's name means that you have power over them. Therefore, whoever this is, or whatever this wrestling partner is, they are very, very, very reluctant to give Jacob a name, though they, and again, there's hints again that this creature is divine, is able to give Jacob a new name. Okay. As apparent with the name change of Jacob here, there are two etiologies or origin myths in this narrative. The first is a kind of dietary particularity, maybe, of the Israelites, why they don't eat the thigh muscle of an animal. And scholars really don't know what this is referring to. I think I've read an article where using cross-cultural data from African cultures, that this part of the hip is maybe reserved for kings, so maybe there's a royal symbolism, not sure. The second etiology, another origin myth, is an etymology, or a kind of explanation of the origin of a word, and it tries to explain why Israel, the nation, is called Israel despite their forefathers being called Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the story says, well, even though he's called Jacob, the nation that descends from him is called Israel because, like Abraham, he is given a new name, Israel. Okay, and that's why Israel is called Israel. Like most names in the biblical text, the real meaning of the name remains a mystery. Okay? And what you have in the biblical text, as almost always with these names, is a kind of false explanation, a false etymology. Okay. That says, Israel, name Israel has something to do with Jacob's pre-dawn struggle. Indeed, embedded in the name Israel are sounds that sound like the Hebrew word sarah, which means to strive, to contend with, and to persevere. Okay, but likely, like all names in the biblical text, the name comes first, and the story explaining the name probably second. Despite being made up, the explanation for Jacob's new name fits very well with the themes of striving and struggling that runs throughout the Jacob cycle, the cycle of stories about this particular figure. Jacob's life is indeed a series of struggles or fighting. He fights with his brother, both in and out of the womb. He clashes with Laban, his uncle, for wives and property. Now he tussles with a mysterious being who renames him right before his reunion with his brother, who he's wronged. Not just Jacob, but as evident by the numerous tales of sibling competition and parental favoritism in Genesis, struggle seems to define almost all the relationships of the members of the first families of Israel. And so it is fitting, therefore, that Jacob's new name is the same one as that of the nation, Israel, that will claim descent from him. The name Israel, if is related to the word to strive, really embodies the struggles, the difficulties, and the pain that mark Jacob's family, or Israel's family, and therefore the family and the nation of Israel as a whole. Jacob's new name also fits, of course, well with the context of the narrative. The struggle occurs right before his reunion with his brothers. Some interpreters maintain that this fight was really not real or physical per se, but something that might have taken place just in Jacob's head. And according to this interpretation, this struggle or this pre-dawn wrestling match is not physical, but a kind of psychological struggle that Jacob is undergoing before his reunion with his brother, the brother whom he's, really taken advantage of, right? Left alone in the dark, Jacob is, alone with his thoughts. Maybe he's thinking about his past, his relationship with his family members, and in particular, maybe his deceptive treatment of his brother Esau, who he is going to see again. And perhaps, he's twisting and turning, going over what has happened, what he's done, what will happen to him and to his family in the not so distant future. And maybe the writers imagine this kind of psychological struggle as a kind of physical struggle with a divine being, a struggle from which Jacob emerges wounded, yet transformed. That Jacob is changed perhaps by the struggle, be it physically or mentally or psychologically, is supported by the new name given to Jacob by his wrestling partner, as names, of course, signify something real and essential about that person or being. And if so, then Jacob, based on the new name, has changed, transformed in some way, some fundamental way. If the new name Israel is related to the word Sarah, to struggle, to fight with in some ways, to strive, as the text suggests, Jacob's new name therefore reflects both his past struggles and striving, much of which is centered on his family, and yet also his perseverance and ability to overcome them. So therefore, what is with Jacob? It would be the same for the community of people that will emerge from that, Israel. They will struggle, but they'll survive. Okay, they'll live through the struggle and maybe come out the other side a bit damaged, like Jacob, who has a permanent limp, but also be transformed through the process. There may be another possible reading of the story and maybe a possible other identification of Jacob's wrestling partner. And this is evident in what happens when Jacob and Esau finally do meet. After this pre-dawn wrestling match, the brothers are finally reunited in Genesis 33. And the meeting begins rather, darkly or forebodingly with, Jacob seeing Esau approaching him with 400 men, fearful that Esau is about to attack. We are told that Jacob organizes his group by placing those who he, loves the most, cares about the most, Rachel and Joseph, in the very, very back. Obviously, if Jacob has changed, his favoritism remains. Okay. So he organizes family almost by rank or by who he wants to protect the most. And then after doing that, Jacob, of course, approaches Esau warily. We're told he bows to his brother 7 times, which is pretty amazing, right? Here is Jacob sending gifts and bowing 7 times to the sibling who he has spent his, early life trying to steal and trick from. One even wonders if that obscure oracle about the twins, about Jacob and Esau earlier, either the lesser or greater will serve the other. It's not clear. Maybe this alludes to this instance where Jacob bows or is, bowing to Esau. Okay. It is not just Jacob who appears to have changed and maybe grown up. As this scene of this kind of initial dread really, instantly transforms into one of heartwarming reconciliation. We're told in Genesis 33, verse 4, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck, kissed him, and they wept. And notice a string of verbs, right, which kind of captures the kind of heightened emotions of this reunion. The brothers seem genuinely happy to see each other. They weep and they kiss each other, and and so this is kind of a wrestling match without any of the violence, right? This is like a good wrestling match. Okay. Esau also seems rather eager to meet his brother's very large family, and both brothers seem glad to find out that things have really turned out well for the other. Right? And afterwards, it's turned out so well actually for the brothers that they even seem to have a little argument about, where Esau says, "Oh, what are all these gifts? I already have too much stuff." And Jacob says, "No, please take it. No, please take it." And in the midst of this little argument, it's like, who's going to pay at the restaurant kind of argument. Jacob says this interesting little thing, okay? And this is found in Genesis 33, verse 10. Okay. Jacob said, "No, please, if I find favor with you, then accept my present from my hand, for truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God, since you have received me with such favor." And it's this phrase, seeing your face is like the seeing the face of God, which is a very strange statement, right? And it makes people wonder as to who Jacob's wrestling partner really was. Okay. And that's because we've seen this phrase or something like this phrase before. Okay. Right after the wrestling match, Jacob marks and names the place where the wrestling match took place. And he calls the place Peniel. And the face of God, literally face of God, because as Jacob explains, I have seen God face to face here. Okay, this is in Genesis 32, verse 30. And notice how eerily similar Peniel, I have seen God face to face. Notice how similar that is to what Jacob says to Esau when they are finally reunited. And this has led some interpreters to wonder whether Jacob's wrestling match may actually have been Esau. According to this interpretation, the brothers had a pre-reunion fight where they really hashed things out with their fists, right? Their previous grievances. Okay, and if so, this might explain why their reunion is actually so amicable and peaceful. Indeed, by all appearances, it seems that Esau has forgiven his brother for his past offenses. However, right, change is not complete in a day, and something of the old Jacob, even after the name change, even after this reunion, something it remains, right? Notice that there is likely still some lingering distrust. When Esau offers to accompany Jacob throughout Esau's land, or maybe even send an escort along, notice that Jacob politely refuses with an excuse, and this is found in Genesis 33, verses 12 through 17. And there's many ways to read why Jacob refuses, okay? And it may be that Jacob is still quite wary of his brother. Perhaps he thinks that Esau is looking for a way to attack him and his family later, right? Maybe when their guard is down. Maybe the text is even hinting that Esau has not fully, completely forgiven his brother, okay? And is just waiting, right, for a better moment to attack. And certainly, if Jacob and Esau reflect the nations of which they will become progenitors, Israel and Edom, this lingering disquiet makes sense, right, as the relationship between the two countries will continue to be deeply ambivalent. Okay, they will never completely get along.